This is the Total Perspective Vortex. I'm Tragula.
And I'm Christian.
It's July 17th, 2020, and that is a Friday. So we have a listener question Friday today, and I cue the jingle.
Leave your questions in the YouTube comments, and we'll answer your query in the next episode of TVV.
Jingle played.
Jingle played.
Yeah, so as memeable as PewDiePie. Okay, so today we have two listener questions. One from YouTube. And why don't you read that out to us?
So Tragula, I would enjoy more of your thoughts on the material and spiritual. I think you mentioned you don't consider yourself an atheist. I feel we have a spiritual side, but no religion on its own can explain it.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm going to be taking a stab at explaining the spiritual world today and separating it from the material.
Tragula taking a stab at religion. That's good.
Taking a stab at religion. Well, I mean, what we've been doing mostly on this podcast is articulating religion for rational or secular-minded people and trying to give them a value of it instead of just sort of showing a Bible or a Quran in their face and saying, follow this because God says so.
Do you want conflict this morning? That's how you get conflict.
Mentioning a Bible and Quran in the same sentence?
No. Religion for rational people. Let's hear you out.
Well, I mean, let's have it because we're going to be splitting a few hairs today because there's something else. Big philosophical discussions on one of Sargon's discords in the philosophy room called the Academy, and I took an excerpt from that too because I think that it was a good challenge there. If you want to read that question number 2, this is one little section out of a much larger essay sort of text, but I thought it was useful, and it was a very valid challenge that I think I need to respond to for the whole audience.
Okay, so we're going to combine those two questions into kind of
so first I'm going to be explaining my spirituality. That's question number 1, the difference between a material world and a spiritual world.
Okay,
and number 2,
regarding the quote, science can't explain how the lightning is called, unquote, notion. This is about storytelling. Can you explain how to kill a vampire? Can you do it with science? Science isn't everything. People are not denying science. They're upset about their mythology being attacked. You'd be upset if someone said Lord of the Rings wasn't scientifically valid and needed to be removed.
Yes. All right. So, and this is the other sense. We're going to talk about the material and spiritual, and I'm going to try and explain the spiritual. How about instead of more rational people to more materialist people?
Thank you.
Will you go with that?
That's
a
good.
better way? That's a better articulation of what I'm trying to get across? Okay.
Yes. Still a little mad.
Okay. And this is I think this is a valid question, and we're going to tie in our answer here because they're very much related. Because the whole issue of the Enlightenment, it allowed scientific thinking and allowed us to create more materialist philosophies or ideologies and using the scientific method. The problem with the Enlightenment is also it allowed the creation of more materialist philosophies using the scientific method. So this is one of the cruxes. Like, people tend to want to put things in the good box or the bad box, but usually most impactful things in the world are like the meteorite that killed the dinosaurs, where it's like there's good and bad that comes out of it. It just touches everything in a very significant way, and the Enlightenment is very much one of those things.
Okay, I was going to say it's not one of those cases; it's one of those bad. But okay, I see what you're saying. I'll entertain this idea. Go on.
Yeah. Well, because we wouldn't be here today if the meteorite didn't hit the Earth and the dinosaurs.
Yeah, for sure, the dinosaurs.
Wiped out.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I mean, I'm using it as an example of something that's immensely impactful, right? Because of the whole idea of impact.
No pun intended.
No, pun very much intended.
Okay, I see.
Yeah, because it's the concept that I'm trying to get across there is that impactful things have both good and bad consequences, and
Right.
it's due to the fact that they're impactful, and everything is interconnected. Okay, and the Enlightenment is definitely in that camp of things. So where we're going where am I going to start answering this question? Well, I've talked a bit with my Origins of Religion videos. We've talked about the shark and like being sort of isolated in their environment. I'm going to take another animal. We're going to start in a very similar place. We're going to take monkeys, and you've probably seen cute little monkey videos, and maybe I'll find one in editing of a monkey teaching a human how to break open a nut with a rock. Right.
Okay.
So they have this aping process, and like I'm going to give a shout out to Rene Girard and Peter Thiel here, because I think that surprisingly a lot of my understanding of the spiritual world has come from Peter Thiel. But
I wasn't aware of that. Okay.
Yeah. But it's because, and I wasn't aware of it really either. But then I started like, wait a minute, I got that idea from Peter Thiel, and wait a minute, I got that idea from Peter Thiel. Because he talks about secular stagnation and how it's affecting the world, and it's very much what I'm talking about too. And how we can reignite the spirituality of the West and get the engine running again that keeps us all together before everything falls apart. Right.
Right.
Where I'm going with this, you have this monkey that is that's teaching a person to crack open nuts, because they're sharing this art of mimicry, and that's what Rene Girard talks about, is that humans are apes, and ape this not only means like the creature, but it also means the process of aping and copying things. So there's very much this idea of copying things that's at the center of consciousness, right? That we're copying from our experience of others, right? We see things in ourselves. So we copy our previous successes. We try and repeat them. Right. And that's that iterative loop. That's how we get closer, is we have the signal in our system that sort of says, well, this is good things came out of this, so I'm going to do more of this. Right.
Right.
Now, once you have a creature with language, that takes this whole system to a new level, because you don't have to do the manual. The monkey doesn't have to hold the other monkey's hand anymore and show them how to break the nut, right? They can just tell them how. They can encode it, and it can be and decode it, and it can be passed from monkey to monkey or person to person here, because once we're linguistic creatures, that's what I was talking about. That's the beginning of religion, right? So this loop is at the center of everything. This iterative loop process, okay, right? And that's the center of what we do. What we do with our as living beings, as conscious beings. Language allows us to extend that out into these abstract realms, where we can pull in ideas from other people and pull in. I'm going to say not just ideas, but morals from other people and stories, because morals are things that or patterns that we see that make the world better. Patterns of behavior that make the world better. Just like the monkey breaking the nut, right? To keep it back and simple. So we not only know how to break the nut because we've seen other people do it, but we've heard all these nut breaking stories. Okay.
Riveting. Yeah.
Riveting. Okay. So
I mean, the nut breaking stories. What you're saying is interesting. Yeah. All these nut breaking stories that might,
So we're getting all the nuts. And if you got monkeys and typewriters, monkeys breaking nuts, you got enough nuts, then you start to form a society, because they start setting up nut factories and they start working together, right?
Right.
And everyone gets nuts. It's amazing.
I won't touch that one.
So in order for this loop to happen, right, this fundamental working of consciousness, we have to have a value-seeking system, and that is as a way to order and make sense of the world. So we have to differentiate the behaviors that get us nuts from the behaviors that don't get us nuts, as the nut behaviors are the good behaviors. And that's this where the spiritual layer comes in, right? And where we're actually adding value, projecting value out onto the world.
Right.
Right? A value hierarchy onto the world. One sort of a value hierarchy is a competence hierarchy. And this is why, Jordan Peterson ties back to like it's older than trees, like inequality and competence hierarchies are older than trees, and like his whole lobster thing. Because it's really, you're getting to the bare bones of spirituality there, assessing if one thing is better than another. Right?
Right.
And it's very important to see that the hyper materialist, we'll say communist because I don't have a better word and people know it, but they're attacking this idea of value hierarchies because in the name of equity, right? So, but then they do that. They're tearing down the very spiritual process we use to see the world and understand the world, and nothing will be accomplished. And remember, we were talking about how the vice of compassion, when it goes too far, is incompetence and ineptness, because they're not actually getting things done. They're just talking about things. They're stuck in that sort of like, let's discuss it forever, right? Because when we do that, we'll get to this perfect, and by the discussion of a rational process, we'll get to the perfect politics or the perfect way of doing things, and then we'll finally act. But there is no impossible utopia, right? So they're trapped in this incompetent phase where nothing gets done. And if you try and bring reality, well, that's disrupting the conversation. That's the fragility. Don't disrupt our never land, right? So bringing it back into like the value hierarchy, the spiritual is centered to the spirit, is filtering what's good, what's bad, and it allows us to see some things and value some things because we are seeing things, seeing the good things, the nut breaking morals versus the ones that aren't breaking the nuts, right? So it's making us focus on things. So it's necessarily blinding us to some things, this perspective.
Fair. Yeah.
Okay. And the problem is that there is a material world out there, and Kant talks about this. And this is sort of those reactionary Enlightenment thinkers. They realize sort of the problem here is that like there's this empiricism is going to it allows us to see all these cool things we couldn't see before, but at the same time something's being lost. So what's being lost is that spirituality, that value system, right? Of good versus bad, and more critically, worse versus better, or better versus worse, because that lets us sort the world and understand. And here's a word that's been heavily demonized that really shouldn't be. It allows us to discriminate between things. Right.
I don't get anything from that. Like it's fine to say discriminate, and I understand it. But
I'm getting I'm drawing people's attention. They talk about discrimination. This is one word that they demonized. We've been demonizing for decades, and it's like this bad thing. You can't discriminate. Discrimination is bad. When you're picking one thing over the other, you are discriminating.
Right.
And it's critical, but it's again drawing that attention to the communist attack on the site and the actual ability for us to get stuff done. So there's the needle to be threaded here, because they've set this time bomb of of talking, when they say discrimination, they link it directly with racial discrimination. But I want to quarantine that off, because racial discrimination is not generally a good way to discriminate in most situations, and we can totally accept that and we put that to the side. But discrimination itself is just the process of seeing the difference between things, right? Like, do I want an iPhone or an Android phone? That's a process of discrimination. Okay, so in that context, it like discrimination is not only our ability to see from good from bad, but more critically, it's our ability to see better from worse, and actually be able to like figure out what we want and what we need to achieve in this world, or assess that iterative loop, that whole process of spirituality, of saying this is how things are. Things can be better, right?
Right.
Okay, so I really wanted to separate out that spiritual layer is about evaluating things. It's about projecting moral value out onto the world.
Right.
Right? And the material layer, the objective material layer, doesn't have that. Right? The universe is uncaring and indifferent. The material universe is uncaring and indifferent. There is no good or bad or right or wrong. There is only cause and effect.
Right.
Right? So we are third generation star. The sun has been, every atom in our body is has been part of a sun or a star previously, at least twice, probably more, 2 times, probably more. Okay, so the scale of things and the energy of things, that there's no value you can put in that. That's not a good thing or a bad thing. That's a fact. It's a fact that doesn't care about your feelings.
Right.
That's the critical thing, is that what happens with materialist philosophy is that they see the value of the material, the rational world, and then they want to start adding value to it without spirituality. And that's where they get into trouble, because they start because of what we are, going back to those monkeys with cracking their nuts, that we're those ape-and things. Our system is wired to find the morals, to find the value in different activities. So we can't help but see the world through a value filter. So once people who are focused on these material philosophies end up doing is they sneak in value filters into their mere material assessments of the world without thinking about it, without realizing what they're doing. And they do so in destructive ways, higgly-piggly, carelessly.
Right.
And that's what causes this disruption. That's what causes this rational game. They get stuck in this rational loop of, well, we'll create the perfect morality in this materialist fashion, but you're answering you're trying to answer a spiritual question in a material realm.
Right.
If that helps. So I think I'm done a pretty good job of separating material from spiritual. If you go to my videos on this, how from stories to religion, if you want to get more of an idea of how you can get that spiritual sense, and if you want to sort of talk about how to get meaning in your life, look at our Wednesday self-improvement episode, so we can talk about spirituality in this state. I'm just trying to get that division between the spiritual world and the material world. So what happened in the Enlightenment that was so good but also so bad is where we're going to go next. We are wired to see the world through these subjective spiritual lenses that put value on everything. And because we go through the world, we have to go through the world through a moral way, and that is why religion was so important, and why we were also so blind to what was going on in the material world. Because we were obsessed. Our visual systems, our whole being, were oriented towards like the sort of the practical, how things work, but in this sense of like finding the morals. And once we find the morals, we stick to the morals. The scientific method is designed to suppress our spiritual side. Like all the whole mentality is to take a step back, question everything, instead of acting with faith, act with doubt, right? And that it's a fundamental attack on faith that is required for action, because instead we're focusing on questioning everything and slowly, meticulously checking our assumptions and moving forward in a very rigorous manner, right? And that allows us very powerfully to see the material world for the first time. And then when we can see patterns that we are missing, abstract patterns that we are missing, that we can then use to inform and bring back to make stories and make and go back and inform our spiritual process and get us even more oriented towards the good, the generative loop, the cornucopia, right? So that's the productivity of science.
Right. Okay.
Right. Is that it actually, the whole point of science is to give us a tool, a rigorous form of thinking that, to the best of our ability, allows us to suppress our spiritual minds.
Spiritual, subjective
Yes.
minds. Yeah.
Right. Our value assessing minds that are orienting toward the good and making and providing meaning for our lives. So that's why scientific minded people attack the idea of faith and attack the idea of spirituality, because it's anthema to what they're doing, but they don't, because of that, they're never taught to appreciate now the value of those things and how they're necessarily engaged in them by what they're doing with their life.
Right.
Right? Okay.
Yeah. I can see why they potentially do that. I don't see why there's a conflict, is just what I was saying.
Well, the conflict is that in order to be rigorously trained in science or the material world, you have to attack, or you have to suppress faith and spirituality. And that can and because you're internally doing that actively when you're engaging in science.
Right.
If you're unsophisticated in how you train someone in science, that can turn into a contempt for the whole notion of spirituality and faith and value systems and value hierarchies.
So it's kind of, they just get into this habit of seeing the world through a specific lens, through the scientific method lens, and that is the only lens through which which has value. Is that?
Yes. Well, that's the materialist lens, you could sort of say. Right. But the materialist lens necessarily it's more than a lens. It's the training is to suppress your faith. You can see how, if your instructor's always telling you to suppress your faith, going back to the beginning of the podcast, how people like to put things in good basket, good bucket, or bad bucket, right? Back to the meteorite, the dinosaurs. What at the beginning, where you're like, I said, well, good things and bad things came out of the meteorite, the dinosaurs. You're like, well, wait a minute, I think it was a bad thing. And I'm sort of putting words in your mouth, but I think that's sort of the notion here. That same intuition is what happens when people teach science without the proper care.
Right.
Is that people are hearing all the time in their training and their actual practice, that faith is in the bad bucket, and that all the problems are solved, all these problems that I'm solving in science class are being solved when I put faith in the bad bucket. So I must be able to create a morality, a moral system with faith in the bad bucket. I must be able to create a moral system and a system of ethics with value hierarchies in the bad bucket, which is an insane idea. I'm just going to say that's the insane idea right there. That the idea that you're going to create a system of morality and ethics with value hierarchies in the bad bucket. But value hierarchies are intricately connected to spiritual and faith. So I think that's actually a good place to end it.
I think so.
And I hope I've answered the two questions. I think you have a better understanding of what spirituality, that my idea of the separation between the spiritual and the material, and also you have a better idea of why science is a good thing and where it came from, and you have a better idea of why the Enlightenment was both was a good thing and a bad thing. Yeah.
Right. And if you have any follow-up questions on that, because there's so much more that we can cover, just please leave a comment in the YouTube comments. Just listen to the jingle. It's very instructive. And make sure to share, like, subscribe, do all that good stuff, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, see you next time. Take care.
All right. Thanks. Cheers.